Have you ever wondered what really happens at the exact moment your consciousness fades at night? I'm not just talking about the pleasant feeling of relaxation, nor the comfort of your bed, but that abrupt, absolute instant when you simply cease to be here. Most people never question this moment, as if it were a weightless biological formality. They believe it's just the beginning of sleep, something banal, repetitive, without any mystery. But what if I told you that this belief is one of the greatest illusions we've carried since birth? That what you call falling asleep is actually the beginning of one of the most extraordinary, dangerous, and at the same time, transformative journeys your soul undertakes every day, without exception. That each night is a secret chapter of your existence. Edgar Cayce, the man known as the sleeping prophet, said that sleep is the soul's temporary return to its true home, as if we were returning, even if only for a few hours, to the origin of all we are. He asserted that the physical body is merely an instrument of action, and that when we fall asleep, we cast it aside, like someone removing a heavy, tight garment at the end of a long day. But why then do we feel as if this moment were a blackout without transition? Why don't we clearly remember what happens between closing our eyes and the first glimpse of a dream? The answer, according to Cayce, is simple and disturbing, because we cross a threshold that the conscious mind was not designed to control, and that, if remembered by everyone, would change the way humanity views life itself. Think deeply about this. You will spend about a third of your life sleeping. You live to be 75. That will be a full 25 years in a state few bother to investigate. Do you really believe nature would waste so much time just repairing muscles, organs, and nerves? Cayce absolutely rejected this idea. He described sleep as a true journey of consciousness through layers and planes of reality that go far beyond our ordinary perception. And here's a detail almost no one considers. In this process, you don't just rest, you live intensely. You experience other places, encounter other consciousnesses, learn lessons that wouldn't fit into your ordinary routine, and sometimes receive warnings that will shape future decisions. How many times have you woken with the strange sensation of having experienced something intensely real, but then it vanished in seconds like smoke? A dream so vivid that it left deep emotional scars throughout the day, an echo of something you can't explain. Cayce would say these weren't dreams in the banal sense, but distorted fragments of authentic experiences your soul experienced away from the physical body. What you call a nocturnal reverie may actually have been an encounter with people who have already departed, a stroll through places that don't exist in the physical world, or even a subtle glimpse of an event yet to happen. Imagine your waking life is like observing the world through a narrow window, with fixed frames that limit what you see. The moment you fall asleep, all walls and frames disappear. There are no longer limits of space or time. There is no gravity holding you back. There are no boundaries to the questions you can ask or the answers you can receive. But what if this freedom, which seems so magnificent, also comes with risks you never imagined? What if, by crossing this invisible boundary, you become visible to other life forms, and not all of them are willing to do you any good? Cayce believed that most people go through this transition unconsciously, like sleeping passengers on a train, unaware of their destination. They have no control over their destination, nor any awareness of the landscape they pass through. But this doesn't mean they're standing still. On the contrary, their souls are more active than ever, interacting, learning, confronting, and sometimes protecting themselves. And here arises the first major reflection he left us with. Is the life we consider real truly the most important? Or is what we experience at night as, or even more, crucial to our evolution than what we experience awake in the light of day? There's a specific moment described by Cayce with almost uncomfortable clarity that's especially fascinating. He called it the initial detachment. It's the exact moment when the soul begins to release itself, almost imperceptibly, from the bonds of the physical body. For some, this happens so subtly that they have no memory whatsoever. For others, more sensitive to these transitions, there arises the strange sensation of falling, of floating, or of being pulled out of their own body, as if the mattress were giving way, or as if something were lifting them up. And here's a detail worth your full attention. According to Cayce, this isn't a physical illusion, but literally your consciousness shifting to another level of existence. If you've ever experienced that sensation of waking up with a jolt, your body on alert as if falling from a high place, Know that you may have been interrupted at the beginning of this detachment. And if you've ever woken with the feeling of having returned from far, far away, perhaps you've returned from a journey deeper and more complex than you can remember. Cayce described these experiences as natural, part of the human spiritual functioning, but rarely consciously perceived. And he insisted that understanding this process was a vital step in expanding one's perception of life. But why should this matter to you in a practical way? Because even if you don't remember it, each night carries within it the possibility of growth, healing, or conversely, spiritual exhaustion. You can traverse higher planes of learning, reconnect with masters and receive guidance, or wander through dense layers, laden with emotions that drain your energy. Cayce warned that the emotional and mental state you take to sleep largely determines the type of experience you will have. Falling asleep in peace, gratitude, and purpose opens luminous paths. Falling asleep with anger, fear, or resentment can trap you in turbulent and limiting experiences. In speaking about this, Cayce wasn't seeking to instill fear, but rather to awaken responsibility. He said, "Be conscious of what you take to sleep, for it shapes not only your dreams, but your spirit and your direction in the unseen world." Think about this before you go to bed tonight. Ask yourself honestly, am I preparing my soul for where I want it to go, or am I just handing it over to chance? And perhaps the most disturbing question Cayce would leave here is this: if you knew with absolute certainty that every time you close your eyes, you are entering real territory, with encounters, decisions, and consequences that affect who you are and who you will be, would you live that experience the same way you do today? Or would you seek to learn to walk through that door with more lucidity, protection, and less submission to the unknown? Because, according to Cayce, ignoring this journey doesn't make it any less real. It just blinds us to the most mysterious and decisive half of our existence. And it is this half that, in the next steps of this revelation, will begin to reveal itself to you. There's a moment that escapes the senses, but which, according to Edgar Cayce, is the key to understanding who we truly are. It's the moment when the body begins to surrender to sleep, but the soul awakens to something much greater. Most of us pass through this moment without noticing, as if it were merely a silent stage of rest. But Cayce described it as the most significant passage of the day, and paradoxically, the least remembered. It all begins with an almost imperceptible shift. Your eyes are already closed, your breathing deepens, and the world around you seems to recede, as if the walls of the room are dissolving into darkness. Sounds fade first, then the weight of your body on the bed ceases to exist. It's as if someone is slowly turning down the volume on reality. Your skin temperature, your heartbeat, even your awareness of your own body begins to fade. At that very point, something begins to loosen. Cayce described this phase as the loosening of the bonds that keep the soul tied to matter. He said it's like taking off a very tight garment. Every second, an invisible pressure is released, allowing the true essence to breathe again. For some, this moment goes unnoticed. For others, it's felt as a small internal shock, a sudden shiver, or that famous falling sensation that awakens us for an instant. He insisted that this is not a physical reflex, but the first step in a real displacement out of the body. Imagine a child who falls asleep on the couch one afternoon. They don't notice anything strange, only that they were watching TV and suddenly it's morning. But what they don't remember is that in the midst of this sleep, their soul may have traveled through places and lived experiences that will influence how they feel the next day. Perhaps they wake up more confident, more peaceful, or on the contrary, strangely restless. For Cayce, this was no coincidence. He saw each night as a journey with concrete, even if invisible, results. In this initial detachment, consciousness begins to exchange the physical filter for the spiritual one. And this is where the detail becomes intriguing. As the physical senses fade, the spiritual senses awaken. Hearing no longer picks up street noise, but begins to pick up subtle vibrations. Touch no longer feels the weight of blankets, but can feel the texture of something that doesn't belong to the physical world. It's a gradual replacement, where what we lose in the material world is compensated for by something infinitely more vast. Cayce stated that the duration of this transition varied from person to person, ranging from minutes to nearly an hour, depending on factors such as relaxation, health, emotional state, and level of spiritual development. A stressed, anxious person with an agitated mind might take much longer to let go. even carrying this tension into the planes they visited. Someone calm, with elevated thoughts, would pass through this door smoothly, reaching more harmonious planes early in the evening. And here comes an observation Cayce often made. Detachment isn't the same every night. Sometimes you remain in a layer close to the body, experiencing dreams mixed with memories of the day. Other times it goes so far that you wake with the strange impression of having lived another entire life while you slept. He said this explains why some days begin with clarity and energy, while others seem to dawn heavy, as if we fought invisible battles while the body rested. Think of a night when you woke up exhausted, even after 8 hours of sleep. Perhaps you dreamed of chaotic situations, chases, or arguments. For Cayce, this could indicate that your soul remained trapped in dense environments where negative emotions dominate. Now think of the opposite, a night when you woke up with a brilliant idea, an unexpected solution to a problem, or an indescribable sense of peace. In this case, he would say you reached higher planes where you received guidance and clarity that could not have been obtained through the rational mind alone. Another point he highlighted was how this initial detachment can be influenced by what you do in the hours before bed. Tense conversations, disturbing news, persistent worries. All of these create a kind of weight on the passage, slowing it down or diverting it to less enlightened layers. On the other hand, a moment of gratitude, prayer, inspiring reading, or silence before bed can act as a boost, propelling your soul through the door more quickly and safely. Cayce also recounted curious stories he heard during his consultations. He once described the experience of a man who always dreamed of being trapped in dead-end corridors. After investigating, he realized that just before sleep, he always indulged in thoughts of frustration and resentment. By changing his nighttime routine, including breathing exercises and a brief reflection on things he was grateful for, his dreams began to change. He began to see himself in open spaces, gardens, and open paths, and reported waking up feeling lighter. For Cayce, this change was not only symbolic, but also proof that the initial detachment was leading him to environments more compatible with his new mental state. But there were also more intense accounts, those that bordered on the inexplicable. People who, during this transition, felt as if they were floating above their own bodies, observing themselves lying in bed. Some described hearing soft voices, feeling light touches on their shoulders, or sensing a friendly presence guiding them out of the room. Cayce said that in many cases, this indicated that the person was being led by spiritual guides to specific experiences, prepared for their learning. However, he warned, detachment can also be perceived as uncomfortable. Some feel a heaviness in their chest, difficulty moving, or the impression that something is watching them. While some of this can be explained scientifically as sleep paralysis, Cayce argued that, spiritually, it could be a moment of vulnerability in which the soul, still attached to the body, is exposed to external influences. Hence the importance of cultivating protection and balance before sleep. For Cayce, this transition was like crossing a corridor between two worlds. One side is physical wakefulness, the other, the vastness of the spiritual planes. In between, a space of adjustment, where you still feel remnants of the body but begin to realize that it no longer limits you. And just as a corridor can lead to different doors, this passage also leads to different destinations. The path you take depends on the keys you carry, and those keys are your emotions, thoughts, and intentions. The most impressive thing is to think that, even as we read or talk about it, this transition happens to everyone, every night, without most of us realizing it. Cayce said that if we could remember this moment clearly, the proof of the continuity of life beyond the body would be so evident that it would forever change the way we view death. After all, every night we move a little further away from it, and every morning we return. And it is precisely at this point that the question Cayce used to provoke reflection arises. If this crossing is inevitable, why not learn to do it consciously? Why not prepare our soul so that upon crossing this threshold, it moves in the direction of light, clarity, and growth, and not into the dark alleys of fear and stagnation? Perhaps the answer lies less in what happens while we sleep, and more in what we do while we are awake. And as this question echoes, a feeling Cayce liked to leave lingers in the air. What if, the next time you close your eyes, you can perceive even for a second the exact moment you begin to leave your body? What you see on the other side may not be at all what you expect, and that's where the real journey begins. Edgar Cayce described the night as a vast, living, pulsating map, that opens before the soul, a vast, dynamic territory divided into regions that differ not only in vibration and density, but also in the intention and spiritual history each traveler carries. He didn't see sleep as a uniform, static space, but as a sequence of layers, or planes, that consciousness traverses, sometimes unconsciously, and other times with stunning clarity, as if awake in another world. Each plane, he said, had its own laws, its specific inhabitants and its unique opportunities for learning and transformation. And this is precisely where most people are mistaken. They believe that all dreams belong to the same nebulous place, when in fact, they vary radically according to the depth and purpose of the journey that takes place that night. The first of these realms, which Cayce called the physical etheric plane, is so close to material reality that, at times, you don't even realize you've left your body. Here, the world seems the same. Your house, your street, familiar faces, but there's always something out of place, a detail that betrays that we're no longer on the physical plane. It could be a door that never existed, an object you don't recognize, a street that should be short but stretches out like an endless maze. This near-perfect overlap with the physical world tricks the conscious mind into believing they're dreaming something insignificant. But Cayce said that this plane is where many real encounters with other equally detached souls occur. Have you ever imagined dreaming about someone and, the next day, that person telling you they also dreamed about you, in the same setting, with the same details? For Cayce, this was no coincidence, but concrete evidence of a genuine encounter in the physical etheric, a shared memory of two consciousnesses. Now, why do some remain on this more superficial plane while others advance to more complex dimensions? Cayce suggested that it depends both on the vibrational state you take to sleep and on what your soul needs to experience that night. Some days the lesson lies in simple contact with loved ones, in resolving old conflicts, or even in the symbolic review of important memories. On other nights, however, the soul is called to something deeper and more demanding. And that's when we enter the second plane, where the rules are no longer the same. The intermediate astral plane is not governed by physical logic, but by the raw power of emotion and intention. Here, to desire is to create, to think is to shape, to feel is to transform. Cayce described it as a space where every thought is immediately translated into form, be it a stunning landscape or a chaotic and suffocating scene. Have you ever noticed how, in some dreams, simply feeling fear makes everything around you become threatening? Or how, when you feel joy and love, the environment seems to light up almost magically? It is on this plane that these changes occur with maximum intensity, and it is here that many people have their most striking and emotionally charged dream experiences. But there's something few people know. Cayce believed that the intermediate astral is also a vast proving ground. It's here that the soul confronts its deepest shadows, confronting ancient fears, persistent addictions, and emotional patterns that hold it back. Think of the times you were the hero of your own dream, saving people, or overcoming impossible obstacles. For Cayce, this was more than just random acting. It was spiritual training, a kind of rehearsal for emotional and moral reactions in the waking world. Have you ever wondered if these silent rehearsals, done while the body sleeps, can actually change the way you act and react in real life? However, this plane is not inhabited solely by human travelers. Cayce spoke of consciousnesses that exist exclusively in these realms, some benevolent and instructive, others indifferent and even predatory. Some act as teachers, presenting challenging situations for the soul to grow and strengthen. Others feed on the emotions they can provoke, seeking to extract energy from fear, anger, or sadness. This explains why, at times, a dream in the intermediate astral can be so exhausting that you wake up drained, even without remembering anything specific to justify such physical fatigue. And then comes the highest layer, the one Cayce treated almost with reverence and care, the higher mental plane. This is not a place for elaborate images or structured stories like the other planes. It is, as he said, a field of pure information and understanding. Imagine entering an infinite library, but instead of physical books, you receive knowledge directly into your mind, as if imprinted on your consciousness in a matter of seconds. Here, the notion of time disappears, and understanding is immediate and total. Many of humanity's greatest inventions and discoveries, Cayce claimed, came from insights received on this plane, even if scientists and artists could not explain where the inspiration came from. Have you ever woken up with a complete solution to a problem that seemed insoluble the day before? Have you ever felt absolute certainty about something you should do without knowing where that clarity came from? These are signs, according to Cayce, that you've touched the higher mind during the night. But not everyone reaches this level. To reach this level, the soul must be aligned with a higher purpose, free from emotional noise and mental distractions that trap it in the lower realms. The clearer the intention and the lighter the energy, the greater the chance of accessing this realm. Interestingly, Cayce didn't see these planes as fixed stages you traverse linearly. A single night can take you from the physical etheric to the higher mental and back again, as if your soul were fulfilling different tasks in different locations, sometimes interconnected, sometimes independent. Sometimes you begin in the etheric, reviewing something from the day. Then you are led to the astral to face a symbolic situation laden with lessons. And finally, you access the higher mental to receive guidance on how to apply what you've learned upon your return. But there's one detail that breaks the mold of most narratives about sleep and spirituality. Cayce said that it's not always the soul that chooses its destination. Often it's guided by spiritual masters, by karmic needs, or even by active connections it maintains with other souls. This means that even if you consciously want to go to a specific place, you can be taken elsewhere if that's where the most needed experience awaits you. Doesn't it seem intriguing to think that, even without consciously remembering it, our nights may be coordinated by a higher intelligence? These shifts may also explain why certain nights seem longer or shorter than they should. Physically, time passed normally, but for consciousness, time in these planes doesn't follow the same ruler we use here. An hour in the physical world can equate to days, weeks, or even years of experience in the astral or mental realm. Have you ever considered that you could have lived an entire decade of subjective experiences in a single sleep cycle and woken with only a vague sense of familiarity? Cayce insisted that understanding these planes is not a mystical luxury, but a practical tool for self-knowledge and direction. By recognizing where you've been and how it affected your waking state, you can adjust how you enter sleep, choosing intentions that increase the chance of reaching higher levels and avoiding denser layers. If each night is an inevitable journey, why not learn to choose your destination better, consciously and strategically? And here's a question that could completely change your relationship with sleep. The next time you dream something so vivid that it moves you deeply, will you be willing to consider that it wasn't just a dream? And if it was a real experience, recorded on one of the planes Cayce described, what impact would that have on how you live the next day and interpret your own life? As this idea settles in and provokes new questions within you, remember, this journey is far from over. There are invisible forces, strings, and connections that ensure the soul returns to the body each morning, and sometimes these same forces can be threatened by conditions we have yet to understand. And it is at this point that the story deepens and becomes even more surprising, setting the stage for revelations that may change everything you thought you knew about sleep and yourself. For Edgar Cayce, the silver cord was not an allegory, nor a poetic concept created to soften the weight of the conversation about life and death. It was something real, tangible to those capable of perceiving beyond the limits of the physical senses, an element present every night, silent and constant, ensuring the continuity of our existence. He described it as a luminous, pulsating thread made of subtle energy, which connects unbreakable until the appointed moment, the physical body to the spiritual body. At each instant, it vibrates in tune with the heart, following the rhythm of the soul itself, functioning as a back-and-forth bridge through which information, memories, vital energy, and even fragments of experiences lived outside the body pass. To many, this vision may sound overly mystical, but Cayce treated it as a concrete, observable phenomenon. He said that if one could witness the spiritual body at the moment of detachment, one would see this thread glow, extend, and gently recede, accompanying each shift of consciousness. In his readings, he described it sometimes as a liquid beam of pure light, sometimes as a translucent cable with silvery reflections, sometimes so intense that it seemed to illuminate the space around it. The quality of this cord varied depending on the person and the moment, being shaped by physical health, emotional balance, daily habits, and even the atmosphere of the environment where one rests. Contemporary records corroborate this perspective. Research on near-death experiences conducted by scholars such as Kenneth Ring and Raymond Moody reveals that approximately 18% of respondents report some kind of thread, rope, or beam of light connecting them to their bodies during the episode. Several described the physical sensation of being pulled back by this connection, just as they were about to cross an irreversible threshold. This is significant, especially since these accounts come from completely different cultures, ages, and contexts, yet share the same imagery and the same visceral sensation. Cayce reported that the cord's strength was not fixed. In moments of health, serenity, and mental clarity, it appeared strong, flexible, and radiant. In periods of illness, stress, or emotional discouragement, it could weaken, becoming more opaque and vulnerable. He warned that environments laden with tension or destructive emotions could create small energetic fissures in this connection, impairing both the quality of rest and the clarity of spiritual experiences. On the other hand, practices of deep breathing, positive visualization, and the cultivation of elevated feelings such as gratitude and compassion strengthened and renewed the cord. There are vivid stories that illustrate this care. In one of his sessions, Cayce described the case of a woman who frequently woke with chest pains and confused memories of being pulled during the night. Upon investigation, he reported that her umbilical cord was tense and rigid, a consequence of chronic anxiety and living in emotionally toxic environments. By changing her bedtime habits, meditation, inspiring reading, and silence, she not only experienced more restful nights but also clearer, more refreshing dreams. Understanding the silver cord also shed new light on the process of death. Cayce explained that its rupture did not occur abruptly, but rather gradually, slowly thinning until the last strand was released. This explained why people in comas or terminally ill patients could still report out-of-body experiences. The connection remained active, allowing for comings and goings until the final moment. For Cayce, ignoring the existence and care of the silver cord was to neglect one of life's most essential elements. He reminded us that every night, without exception, it is this connection that ensures our return. An abrupt awakening, an interrupted dream, or an intense feeling of peace after sleep can be signs of how this invisible bridge is working. And he posed a question that resonates to this day. If this is the thread that sustains your life, why not care for it with the same attention you give your physical body? Perhaps by recognizing and strengthening this connection now, you are not only protecting each night's journey of the soul, but also preparing yourself for the serenity of the final crossing. Edgar Cayce said that understanding the spiritual journey wasn't just about accepting the existence of invisible planes, but also about developing the conscious ability to move between them with intention, clarity, and purpose. For him, it wasn't enough to recognize that there's more than meets the eye. One had to learn to interact with these dimensions like someone mastering a new language, a language made not of words, but of sensations, symbols, and perceptions that escape ordinary reasoning. And like any language, it requires constant practice to become fluent. He described how, by closing one's eyes and immersing oneself in silence, the mind begins to perceive something that has always been present, a constant vibration, a silent backdrop against which all thoughts move. It is in this state of attention that, according to Cayce, we become attuned to subtler planes and become receptive to impressions that do not belong to the physical world. Many of these impressions arise as visual flashes, quick intuitions, or a sense of profound recognition, as if we were not learning something new, but recalling forgotten truths. Cayce insisted that for these perceptions to be accurate, a state of inner clarity is necessary. Just as a cloudy mirror distorts the reflected image, a mind saturated with distractions, anxiety, or selfish intentions also distorts spiritual interpretation. Therefore, he advocated daily discipline, meditation to calm, study to deepen, introspection to organize thoughts, and vigilance over what one consumes in terms of words, images, and conversations, as everything influences the subtle realm. His accounts were filled with stories of transformation. A young man, immersed in grief after the sudden loss of a friend, adopted the practices Cayce recommended. First came clearer dreams, then accurate intuitions that guided him in professional decisions, and finally out-of-body experiences in which he spoke with deceased loved ones, receiving guidance that changed his way of life. This evolution was not instantaneous, but built step by step, each small achievement supporting the next. Cayce also warned about the dangers of venturing unprepared. He compared crossing plains to swimming in the open sea. One must know the direction, keep one's breathing under control, and respect the strength of the current. Those who sought intense sensations out of curiosity or escape, without understanding the territory, often returned confused, drained, or struggling to reintegrate into everyday life. Therefore, he emphasized that every spiritual experience should be anchored in a higher purpose. Intriguing facts emerge from his records. People who, during an out-of-body experience, perceived verifiable information, details about places, objects, or situations they had never physically witnessed. Although some science still resists, research on non-local perception and expanded consciousness has been accumulating cases that echo Cayce's observations. Institutions such as the Monroe Institute and the University of Virginia have cataloged hundreds of such accounts, challenging purely materialistic explanations. For Cayce, the value of these experiences was not in proving anything to others, but in expanding one's understanding of life and strengthening virtues such as empathy, compassion, and personal responsibility. Each journey, each contact, and each insight should result in more conscious actions on the physical plane, more balanced relationships, more aligned decisions, and a greater capacity for discernment in the face of challenges. This perspective transformed his guidance into practical guides. It wasn't about escaping the physical world, but about using it as a learning ground, a laboratory where lessons from the invisible take shape and take effect. For him, the material world was the classroom, and the spiritual dimensions were infinite libraries in which we seek answers and wisdom for our journey. And he left a reflection that resonated deeply. Perhaps life is an uninterrupted alternation between worlds, and what we call death is merely a definitive change of address. If so, the way we learn to cross these boundaries while alive will shape the serenity and clarity with which we cross the final frontier. Edgar Cayce always reminded us that knowledge without action is like a seed left on the table. It may have all the potential to become a leafy tree, but it will never take root unless it is planted in the soil. As we reach the end of this journey, it's not just about understanding spiritual concepts or feeling momentary inspiration, but about transforming these ideas into living practices that shape our daily lives and strengthen the connection between who we are and who we can become. The strategy begins with silence. Set aside a moment each day to be alone, without distractions. It could be at dawn, when the world is still at rest, or at night, when responsibilities cease. In this space, breathe deeply, calm your body, and allow your mind to stabilize. It is in this state that perception opens and we begin to notice what previously went unnoticed. This simple habit strengthens mental clarity, protects the energy field, and makes us more receptive to subtle impressions coming from higher planes. The second step is mindful observation. Throughout the day, pay attention to your emotional reactions. Notice what triggers anger, fear, joy, or serenity. These responses reveal a lot about how aligned or misaligned we are with our deepest values. Cayce taught that we cannot control what happens around us, but we can choose our response. This practice, over time, creates an internal posture of balance that is reflected in all areas of life. The third step is integration. All spiritual learning only becomes real when it begins to influence our actions. Ask yourself daily, what can I do today to be a version of myself more aligned with my purpose? Maybe it's an act of silent kindness. Perhaps it's telling the truth when it's easier to keep it secret, or simply taking better care of yourself to gain energy and clarity. Don't underestimate small gestures. They build the foundation upon which great transformations are built. The fourth step is discipline. There is no true change without consistent repetition. Cayce said that spirituality is not a one-time event, but a state cultivated daily. This means creating rituals that sustain this connection, meditating before bed, keeping a dream journal, reflecting on the day's experiences, praying, or giving thanks upon awakening. Over time, these rituals become anchors, points of stability amidst the chaos. The fifth step is service. Cayce emphasized that spiritual growth is not a solitary path. Sharing what we learn, helping without expecting anything in return, being there for someone in need. All of this strengthens our own energy and broadens our understanding of the interdependence of all things. By serving, we nourish the natural flow of giving and receiving, balancing the exchange between ourselves and the world. But perhaps the most important step is the sixth: perseverance with compassion. There will be days when we feel far from what we seek, when our minds are agitated or our bodies are tired. It is in these moments that we need to remember that the path is not made of perfection, but of constant return. Each time we return to practice, even after straying, we strengthen the bridge we are building. By applying these steps, you create not just a routine, but a state of being that permeates every aspect of your life. Mental clarity increases, relationships become more authentic, the body responds with greater vitality, and the connection with the spiritual dimension deepens. It's not an overnight process, but a continuous process, and each small action is a stepping stone. So as I close this video, I leave you with a sincere invitation. Don't let this knowledge remain just a memory. Choose one of the steps and start today, even if it's simple. Write down your insights, observe the changes, and notice how, little by little, your life begins to reflect what you cultivate within. And if this message touched you in any way, subscribe to the Deep Psyche channel, like this video, and share your questions or experiences in the comments. You can do so anonymously if you prefer. Your participation not only strengthens this community, but also inspires others to begin their own transformational journey.